The wind kicked dust across the sun-baked plains as Elias Hart rode into the town of Blue Ridge. His horse limped, ribs visible through a coat long overdue for brushing. Elias wasn't much better, scarred, sunburnt, and worn thin from years of drifting. A Union veteran with nothing to his name but a rifle, a pack, and memories he couldn't outrun. Blue Ridge looked like every other frontier town to Saloons. One church, and more problems than sheriffs. But Elias wasn't here for salvation. He was chasing rumors of work, a place to disappear, and perhaps, if he was lucky, something close to peace. He hadn't even reached the general store when trouble found him. A cry rang out near the bank, high, sharp, and unmistakably a woman's. Elias turned to see a masked man wrenching a bag from the hands of a young lady dressed in riding gear. Her wide-brimmed hat tossed aside in the struggle. Her eyes blazed with fury, not fear, as she fought back against the thief. Elias reacted on instinct. Before the townsfolk could blink, he crossed the street, pistol drawn. One warning shot into the air. The thief bolted. The bag hit the ground. As the woman staggered backward, Elias caught her arm to steady her. Up close, she was older than he first thought, late 20s, maybe, but with a look in her eye that said she'd lived through more than her share. "You all right, ma'am?" She yanked her arm free. "I had him handled." Elias raised a brow. "Didn't look that way to me." "You should learn to mind your business, mister," he smirked. "I've been told that before." Her name was Catherine Whitlock, he learned, that evening, owner of Whitlock Ranch, the largest spread of land in 3 counties. She invited him to supper out of obligation, not gratitude, and kept the conversation as lean as the steak she served. But Elias wasn't easily shaken. He watched her with quiet curiosity. She was all sharp lines, precise words, and unreadable eyes. 3 days later, she offered him a deal. "I need a husband," she said flatly. "Not in the way you're thinking. Legally, to protect the ranch. My father's will left everything to me, but the council doesn't trust a woman alone to manage this much land. The vultures are circling men with names, power, and no concern for cattle." Elias leaned against a fence post, eyeing the horizon. "You want me to marry you? On paper, you'd get the Whitlock name. A future. Half the land, eventually. In return, you work it like it's yours and keep the wolves away." He studied her. "And what don't I get?" She held his gaze, unflinching. "My heart. This isn't love, it's survival." Elias didn't answer right away. He'd lived off scraps and side jobs for years. Had no kin, no home, no claim to anything. She was offering him land, purpose, a legacy, everything a man like him wasn't supposed to hope for, except the one thing he realized. In that moment, he wanted most her, but he couldn't afford to want. "I'll do it," he said, and offered her a calloused hand. They shook on it under the dying sun. The wedding was held under the big oak tree on the South Ridge. No preacher, just the town judge, a witness or two, and a simple ring that Catherine pulled from her late father's desk drawer. No one kissed. No one smiled. Catherine's dress was cream, not white. Elias wore his cleanest shirt, sleeves rolled up, scars showing. As they rode back to the ranch together, silence stretched between them. Elias looked out at the fields of golden grass, swaying in the wind. The distant silhouette of cattle dotting the hills. "You trust me enough to give me your name," he said finally. "Why not your heart?" Catherine's expression didn't change. "Because names can be taken back. Land can be won, but hearts, once broken, they don't grow back the same." Elias didn't press her. Not yet, but as he looked toward the house on the hill, his house now, in name at least, he felt something stir in his chest. Not just hope. Something deeper. Dangerous. He had her trust, her name, even her dreams. But not her heart. And that would change everything. The Whitlock Ranch stretched out like a kingdom of dust and promise. Miles of open range, thick oak groves, and creeks that wound through the hills like veins of silver. Elias Hart had never owned anything in his life now. By law and agreement, he owned half of this empire. But ownership didn't mean belonging. Their first night as husband and wife passed in silence. Catherine showed him to the spare room beside the kitchen. "The walls are thin," she said. "Don't snore." Elias chuckled, but her tone made clear the rules were still in place. No intimacy. No assumptions. Just partnership. Still, it was hard to sleep in a real bed, in a real house, with the smell of clean linens, and the faint scent of lavender drifting in from her side of the hallway. Harder still not to imagine what it would be like to hold her. He pushed the thought away. He was here to work. By sunrise, Elias was up and on horseback. The ranch hands, some of whom had worked for Catherine's father, greeted him with wary eyes. A few refused to meet his gaze altogether. Elias knew what they saw. Nobody, a war-torn drifter who'd married into fortune. They didn't know he bled for every mile behind him. He didn't speak much that first week. He let his work do the talking, patching fences, breaking horses, hauling feed, and sleeping just enough to do it all again the next day. The men began to nod at him in passing. One even offered him a drink at dusk. Catherine noticed. She ran the books, managed the schedules, and negotiated cattle sales with the kind of precision that made bankers nervous. She didn't ask for advice, and Elias didn't offer any, but sometimes, when the day was done and the air was soft with the scent of hay and warm earth, they sat on the porch quietly, sipping coffee. She watched the horizon like it owed her something. He watched her. "You ever think about leaving this place?" Elias asked one night, tipping his chair back. Catherine didn't look at him. "This ranch is all I've ever known." "That's not an answer." She paused. "Leaving means trusting someone else to keep it standing. I've done that once. Never again." He heard the bitterness in her voice, a crack in her armor. "I wasn't talking about leaving it for good," he said gently. "Just breathing different air." She turned her eyes on him then, sharp, measured. "You think I don't breathe just fine here?" Elias held up a hand. "Didn't mean to poke the hornet's nest." She looked away again. "You didn't. I just prefer knowing where I stand." That was the difference between them, he realized. Elias had learned to drift, to adapt, to make camp in chaos, but Catherine, she anchored herself to things she could control: land, schedules, numbers, rules, and love. Love was chaos. Still, something shifted between them after that. Small things. Catherine began leaving coffee for him in the morning. He built a shelf for her ledgers without being asked. They spoke more during dinner weather, cattle prices, the coming harvest. Her laugh, rare and low, crept into his bones like sunlight on cold skin. But even then, when their boots brushed under the dinner table, she'd pull back. One night, a letter arrived from Denver. Elias found her staring at it in her study, face unreadable. "Everything all right?" he asked. She folded the paper with care. "Just business." But her hand trembled when she tucked it away. He didn't press. He'd learned better than to pry. And yet, as he lay awake later that night, listening to the coyotes howl and the wind whisper through the eaves, he wondered who had broken her before him and how deep the wound ran. He had her trust now. She spoke to him with more than just instructions. She looked to him in moments of doubt. She leaned on him when the ranch faced its inevitable burdens. He even had her name. People in town now called him Mr. Whitlock. A title he never asked for but couldn't help wanting to earn. He had her plans, her trust, even her dreams for the ranch, but he didn't have the one thing he was starting to want. More than all the rest, he didn't have her. By the time the wildflowers returned to the fields and the cattle bore spring calves, Elias Hart had carved himself a place at Whitlock Ranch, not just in duty, but in rhythm. He no longer felt like an outsider pressing his boots into borrowed soil. The ranch breathed with him now, every sunrise beginning with his footsteps on the porch and every sunset ending with Catherine's voice calling out numbers from her ledger. They operated like a pair of oxen yoked to the same plow, leaning into the same burden, pushing toward the same end. But every time Elias reached for something beyond their unspoken pact, something warmer, deeper, he'd feel the weight of her wall, strong as stone, and just as cold. Still, the ranch began to grow under their joined hands. What had once been a patchwork operation was becoming something worthy of legacy. It started with the irrigation project. Catherine had drawn up blueprints, a plan to redirect runoff into a reservoir that would feed the lower pastures and support more head through the dry season. It was ambitious, risky, but Elias backed her fully. They spent long hours marking trenches, calculating flow, arguing about engineering with sticks in the dirt. "You know, you could just trust me," she said one afternoon, wiping sweat from her brow. "I do," Elias replied, standing over a map. "I just don't trust dirt and water to behave like men." That drew a soft, surprised laugh from her. Moments like that began happening more often. One night, as they sat side by side, on the porch, boots kicked up, dusk sinking behind the hills, passed him a glass of whiskey without a word. Elias took it, their fingers brushing. She didn't pull away. "You ever think this would be your life?" she asked suddenly. Elias glanced over. "Which part?" the land, the cattle, or the beautiful woman I'm not allowed to kiss. Catherine's mouth twitched, but her eyes remained guarded. Any of it. He paused. No. I thought I'd die, with a bullet in my back or whiskey in my blood. Didn't imagine I'd ever sleep under the same roof twice. She sipped her drink. And now I think I could build something. He looked out over the ranch. Something worth passing on. Her silence was heavier than most. He could feel her thinking, calculating whether to let him closer or shut the door again. In the weeks that followed, Catherine started inviting him into more than just ranch operations. She asked his opinion on market prices, legal contracts, even what color to paint the barn roof. It felt like trust. It felt like a kind of intimacy, and Elias, for all his restraint, began to hope. One evening, he caught her standing in the doorway to the bunkhouse after dinner, staring out at the moonlit range. She didn't hear him approach. You always this restless at night? He asked gently. She turned, surprised, but didn't flinch. Only when things are going too well. Elias leaned beside her, arms crossed. You think waiting for the other shoe to drop is safer than believing things might last. She hesitated. I think love makes people foolish. Weak. I think love makes people try. He looked at her. I've been trying. I never asked you to. You didn't have to. They stood in silence for a long moment. Then she said the words he didn't expect. You've become more to me than I meant you to be. He stepped closer. Then let me be more. But just as quickly, she took a step back. Elias, I don't know how. He nodded slowly, swallowing disappointment like ash. Then I'll keep building until you figure it out. That night, as he lay in his bed listening to the soft rustle of wind through the open window, he knew he was already too deep. He didn't just want the ranch, or the legacy, or even the safety of a quiet life. He wanted her laughter, her burdens, her silences, and all the jagged edges she tried so hard to hide. But love, he was learning, could not be built like fences or barns. It had to be given, and she wasn't ready to give it. Not yet. The first storm of the season rolled in just after sundown. Not the usual summer drizzle, but a rage of thunder and wind that clawed across the plains like a beast let loose. Elias stood on the porch, watching the clouds churn black and mean. Lightning cracked in the distance. The cattle were still out in the north pasture, too far to bring in now, not with the sky boiling over. He turned to go inside when he saw Catherine standing behind him, arms folded tightly across her chest, her face pale. You all right? He asked. She didn't answer right away. Storms make me remember things, she said finally, barely above the wind. Elias didn't press, but he didn't go inside either. Later that night, the wind screamed against the walls and the rain came, sideways. When a shutter broke loose with a bang, Elias was already out of bed, hammer in hand. By the time he'd secured it and come back inside, Catherine was waiting in the kitchen, lantern lit, pouring 2 cups of coffee with shaking hands. I couldn't sleep, she said simply. Elias sat down at the table. She pushed a cup toward him, then stared down into hers like it held all the answers she'd tried to forget. Do you want to know why I can't? Why I haven't let you in? She asked suddenly. Elias didn't move. Only if you want to. Tell me. She hesitated, then looked up. Before the war, I was engaged. His name was Owen Hale, son of a banker in Denver. Charming. Clever, knew how to say all the right things. My father didn't trust him, said he was slicker than a greased politician. But I was young. I thought love meant ignoring the warnings. Elias listened in silence. When my father got sick, he changed his will. Left the ranch entirely to me. No room for Owen. Owen told me we'd still marry, that it didn't matter. Her mouth twisted. But 2 weeks later, he left. Took a job with a railroad investor and never looked back. She set her cup down, steady now. That was the last time I believed in promises. Elias exhaled. So I pay the price for his betrayal. No, she said quickly. No, Elias, you've never lied to me. You've done everything I asked, given more than I deserved. She paused. But trust and love, they're not the same thing. No, he said softly. They're not. But one can lead to the other. Lightning flashed again. In its brief light, he saw the conflict in her eyes. Then the moment passed, and she stood. Good night, Elias. And just like that, the door between them closed again. In the days that followed, they both buried themselves in work. The storm had torn up half the south fence line, so Elias led the repairs with a quiet fury that kept his hands busy and his heart from breaking open. Catherine, meanwhile, poured herself into the books, calculating losses, rebalancing feed schedules, never looking in his direction longer than necessary. But something had shifted. The silence between them was no longer cold, it was fragile, like glass waiting to crack. One evening, as Elias saddled up to check on a sick calf, one of the ranch hands, Joe, a wiry older man with too much sun on his skin, leaned over and said, "She was different before. Softer." But Owen gutted her. Elias didn't answer. Joe continued, "But she's watching you now. You got her attention. That's more than any man's managed since." Elias tipped his hat. "I'm not looking for attention, Joe. I'm looking for her heart." "Then you'd better be patient and stubborn." Elias smiled grimly. "Lucky for me, I'm both." That night, as the sky cleared and the stars blinked back into view, Elias stood outside Catherine's study. The door was open a crack. She was bent over her father's old ledger, a soft glow of lamplight warming the lines of her face. He could have walked in, could have told her he wasn't Owen, that love wasn't a weakness, that she was already part of him in ways she didn't understand, but instead, he turned and walked away. Because ghosts don't vanish with words, they fade only when you let them go, and Catherine hadn't yet. Summer rode in hard that year, drying the creeks and turning the grass to brittle gold. The days stretched long and dusty, and the cattle grew restless under the relentless heat. Elias didn't mind. The labor kept his body too tired for his thoughts to wander where they shouldn't, like how Catherine had been quieter lately, more watchful, like she was waiting for something. Then, one afternoon, that something rode into town wearing a tailored coat and a grin full of ghosts. Owen, hail. Elias spotted him outside the bank, tipping his hat to an old rancher who clearly remembered him. Owen looked every bit the polished businessman he was rumored to be now. Clean boots, crisp vest, and the kind of smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. Elias watched from the saddle as Owen caught sight of him. Recognition flickered. Then, came that same grin, like nothing had ever been broken. "Mr. Whitlock, I presume," Owen said as he approached, extending a gloved hand. Elias didn't take it. "You've got the wrong man," Elias said evenly. "I only borrowed the name." Owen's smile didn't falter. "Catherine always was generous. Mind telling me where I can find her?" Elias's jaw tensed. "What for?" "Just visiting old friends. Thought I'd pay my respects to the lady of the land. I hear she's built herself quite the empire." "She didn't build it with you," Elias said, voice low. "No," Owen said, chuckling. "But I could've, maybe still can." Before Elias could respond, Owen turned and strolled into the bank, like he owned the place. Catherine didn't flinch when Elias told her Owen was in town. She just set her pen down and said, "I expected he might show his face eventually." "Why now?" Elias asked. "He heard about the cattle contracts we landed last month. We're profitable, which means valuable." She stood, brushing dust from her skirts. "He's not here for me. He's here for the ranch, but he'll use you to get it." Catherine met his gaze. "If I let him." 3 days later, Owen came to the ranch. Elias was in the barn when the carriage pulled up. Owen stepped out like he belonged there, as smug as a cat in cream. Catherine met him on the porch. She didn't invite him in. They spoke for a long time, too long for Elias's comfort. He stayed where he was, watching from the shadows, pretending to mend a broken latch. When Owen finally left, Catherine didn't come back inside. She just stood there, staring after him. That night, Elias found her on the porch, arms wrapped tight around herself. "What did he want?" Elias asked. "To buy me out," she replied. "Or marry me again, whichever gets him the land faster." "And I told him I already had a husband." Elias waited. "He said you're a nobody," she added. "That you were a mistake I'd eventually fix." Elias snorted. "He's half right." Her eyes flicked to his. "Which half?" "I am a nobody, but I'm not a mistake." Silence, then she whispered, "No, you're not." The next week passed in a haze of heat and unease. Owen lingered in town, visiting merchants, meeting landowners, spreading charm like oil slicks. Rumors spread that he was courting investors, planning to open a rail line through the valley, a line that would cut straight across the Whitlock property if he could get a claim. Catherine said nothing, but Elias saw the tightness in her jaw, the weariness in her eyes. One night, over dinner, she set her fork down. "Why did you say yes?" she asked. Elias looked up. "To what?" "To me, the proposal, the name, the work. You had nothing, and I offered safety but nothing more. Why take it?" He met her gaze. Because even a borrowed life with you was better than a real one without. She looked away, blinking fast. I wanted more, he added. Still do, but I never expected it. She stood abruptly. Good night. He didn't stop her, but the next morning, she left a note on his plate. He's not getting this land. Or me. Not again. It wasn't love, but it was a war cry, and Elias knew she had finally chosen a side. The fire came just before dawn. Elias was already awake, tightening a saddle cinch when the smoke caught his nose faint. Sharp, wrong. A few seconds later, the alarm bell clanged from the west fields. One of the ranch hands came galloping in, shouting before he reached the yard. Barn. West storage. It's burning. Elias didn't wait for orders. He was already on his horse, thundering toward the smoke trail curling above the ridgeline. Catherine appeared on the porch in her nightgown, eyes wide, calling after him. But he was gone before her words reached him. The west barn was more than storage. It held tack, feed, and the fencing supplies they'd just hauled in for winter prep. If they lost it, they'd lose months of labor and thousands of dollars. When Elias arrived, the flames were licking high into the dawn sky, orange against a bruised horizon. Men were already forming lines from the pump to the blaze. He jumped in without hesitation, hauling buckets, shouting orders, kicking in a door to free two terrified horses. He barely heard the crack when the roof began to give, but he felt the heat explode around him. A beam collapsed, knocking him sideways. Splinters sliced his shoulder. Smoke filled his lungs. He stumbled, coughing, crawling, dragging himself toward the blur of voices and water and sky. Then strong hands. Someone grabbed him, pulled, hauled. The world went dark. He woke to candlelight. His shoulder was bandaged, his chest tight with burns, but he was alive, breathing. The room was still quiet. Catherine sat beside the bed, hair loose around her face, her hands shaking as they rested in her lap. You're awake, she whispered. He tried to speak, coughed instead. You nearly died, she said, tears in her voice. You ran in like the whole place would fall apart without you. He managed a hoarse smile. Maybe it would. She swallowed hard. Don't say that. I'm not sorry, he rasped. This ranch it matters. More than my hide. Catherine stood abruptly and turned away. Fists clenched at her sides. I never wanted you to become another name on a headstone, she said. I can't, her voice cracked. I can't lose someone else. You haven't lost me yet, Elias said gently. She turned back. Her face was raw, vulnerable. But I almost did. He watched her, saw all the walls she'd built over the years trembling, cracking. You keep pushing me away, he said. You let me carry your name, your land, your future, but not your heart. Because if I give you that, she whispered, and I lose you, you already gave it. He interrupted. You just won't admit it. Silence stretched between them like a tightrope. Then, softly, I can't do this anymore. Catherine. I can't keep pretending I'm content with half of you. He shifted, pain flashing in his eyes as he tried to sit up. When I leave this bed, I'm leaving this house. This life, I'll give it all back, the name, the land, whatever you want. But I won't stay where I'm only trusted to survive, not loved to stay. Catherine didn't answer. She just looked at him like he'd torn something out of her, something vital. Then she turned and walked out. 2 days passed. He healed slowly, quietly, in the spare room of the bunkhouse. She didn't come, but neither did Owen, who left town as fast as he'd arrived when word spread that the fire had been ours, that Elias Hart had walked through flames to stop it. The ranch hands came by. They asked if he was staying. He said he didn't know. On the third morning, he packed a saddlebag and stepped outside. The sun was just rising, and the house stood quiet in the golden light. Familiar, empty. He mounted his horse, and then he heard her voice. Elias turned. Catherine stood barefoot in the grass, her dress wrinkled, eyes swollen from sleepless nights. She walked toward him slowly, as if every step cost her more than she could afford, but she took them. Anyway, I've been selfish, she said, voice steady. I've been scared. But I'm not scared of you. She swallowed. I'm scared of how much you matter. Of what it means to need someone again. But I do. I need you. I love you, Elias. Not just for what you've done but for who you are. He didn't speak. He didn't need to, because he saw it in her eyes, the walls fallen. The truth bared at last. She wasn't offering him safety, or land, or duty. She was offering him herself, and that was everything. Elias dismounted slowly, never taking his eyes off her. The world narrowed to the sound of boots in dewy grass and the space between them so wide for so long, now closing with every step. When he reached her, he stopped short, hands loose at his sides. "Say it again," he said, voice low, rough with emotion. Catherine met his gaze. "No armor. No walls. I love you, Elias Hart." She stepped forward and placed her hand on his chest, right over the bandage. "I should have said it sooner," she whispered, "but I needed to know I wasn't just handing you a name or a piece of land. I needed to give you me. All of me." His breath hitched. "And this isn't part of the arrangement." "No," she said, smiling through her tears. "This is me breaking the arrangement?" Elias didn't wait another second. He wrapped her in his arms, drawing her in so tightly it felt like the past. The pain, and all the space between them finally collapsed. Her lips met his, and everything he had wanted, longed for, fought for was there. It wasn't soft or timid. It was years of silence shattered in one kiss. A promise rewritten, no longer made of duty or convenience, but of choice. When they finally pulled apart, her hand was still resting over his heart. "I almost lost this," she murmured. "You never had to," he said. She laughed gently, tearful but lighter than he'd ever seen her. "I didn't know how to believe in someone again. You taught me." He leaned his forehead against hers. "Then let's build something worth believing in." By autumn, the ranch was thriving. The fire damage was repaired, thanks to long hours and willing hands. Elias returned fully to work, shoulders still aching on bad days, but heart lighter than it had ever been. The ranch hands worked harder now, not just out of respect for the land, but for the couple who'd poured themselves into it. Catherine no longer sat alone at night, staring at ledgers. Now she and Elias pored over plans together, new fencing, better grazing rotations. The possibility of breeding horses next spring. Their partnership was no longer just practical, it was personal, intimate, real, at night. They shared the same bed, not out of obligation, but out of need for warmth, for closeness, for love neither had believed they'd deserve again. They still argued, still challenged each other, but now it ended with laughter or a kiss, not a slammed door. One evening, Catherine walked into the barn and found Elias sanding down a new cradle. He'd been secretly building in his spare hours. "You planning on inviting me to this surprise?" she asked with a smile. He looked sheepish. "Just wanted to be ready. In case." She stepped into his arms. "You already are." They didn't speak the words aloud that night. They didn't need to. In town, folks still called him Mr. Whitlock, but now it was with respect, not for the name he'd taken, but the one he'd earned. And when Catherine walked beside him, fingers laced with his, no one doubted it was love that bound them now. Even Owen Hale's name had faded into something meaningless, a warning, a ghost finally laid to rest. One day, while riding along the South Ridge, Catherine pointed to a stand of trees where the view stretched wide across the valley. "I want to build a second house there," she said. "For the children, for the future." Elias looked at her, eyes soft. "A whole home, built on love this time." She smiled, "Not borrowed, not bargained." "Ours," he nodded. "Then let's build it." And so, they did. Not just walls and roof, but a life built from trust that was earned, love that was chosen, and a promise that no longer needed to be spoken aloud, because now, Elias Hart had her trust. He had her name. He shared in her dreams. But, finally, he had the one thing he'd longed for most, her heart forever.